Welcome back to the Student Hub Live. In this session, we're going to take a look at the importance of writing in your own words. Now, I'm joined by Claire Rostron and Ellen Heeley. Now, Claire was an author on the science of the mind and is also a tutor who loves spending time with her Level 1 students on study skills. And Ellen is another chemist. You'll notice we've got lots of contributors here from STEM today, which is brilliant. She's a chemist and also an academic conduct officer, as are indeed many of the people here, including Claire. And Ellen has also been a tutor for 10 years and has written on several modules ranging from levels 1 to 3. So they've both written a lot, sometimes in their own words and sometimes not. So they're here to tell you what they have learned in their academic travels. Okay. There are many different contexts, and we started today looking at academic integrity, both from the perspective of a university and what that means for students. And I'd like to take a similar approach here, because this isn't something that just applies to students. Writing in your own words is incredibly important as an academic, which I guess is why we facilitate this whole idea right from day one for our students. So Ellen, I wonder if you can tell us about what it means to you.
Well, writing in my own words, obviously I don't just write course material, which often you're just writing material that's out there already for people to, you know, academic material. But going on through your career as an academic, you start to do research and you start to write your own research papers. Of course, I've got to do those in my own words. I can't just copy somebody else's words. I'm contributing nothing new and I wouldn't get published. So it has to be my own research and it has to be my own words when I'm relaying that to other academics, you know, all around the world in publications.
But Peter was talking about this peer review process and about this whole idea of building arguments, that we need to sort of cite other people's work appropriately and build the foundation so that your own work, albeit unique to you, is scaffolded on something that already exists. You can't say, I've noticed that, you know, none of these bees are eating large bars of chocolate. Fact. You know, we can't just walk in with assumptions like that that aren't based on any other logic.
Yeah, well, you'd be expected to do a big literature review and cite people and their opinions or rewrite, but I wouldn't get a paper which is 10 pages long and discuss the entirety of it. I would want to group it together with other people's research in just one or two key sentences in an introduction, and then say their results are such and such, but obviously we're doing something different and we're taking this further, and so what we're doing.
Back to the whole idea that Peter was talking about academic integrity, yes, and representing other people's voices and acknowledging their sources. Yes. And I guess that's the bit about not writing in your own words. It's not that you're here being, you know, acknowledged plagiarists. It's the fact that you are using and scaffolding and building other people's
yes.
things, and you need to represent that accurately and fairly.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, you are. Just to say that I think there's a difference though between just simply describing what yes. previous work has done, yeah. And then kind of saying what you think of it and being a bit more evaluative, which would be the sort of thing that Ellen would do. So yeah, that's more of the writing in. I think that's a good distinction between you know, just taking what somebody else has already said and describing their thoughts, as opposed to saying, here's what they said, here's what I think about it, yes. and here's where it fits with what I've learned and my knowledge. Because
we were talking before about some students saying, oh, level 3 it's a lot harder, and I guess it's this whole distinction between to what extent you're descriptive at level 1 and say this is this, this is this, and then you start to evaluate and use your own experience and perhaps other things, other methods or other ways of looking at the world that may then apply to that particular thing, and not be critical of it, but recognise, I guess, the limitations.
I think that's quite an important skill at level 3. And I think we work very carefully towards that through the levels. Yeah. So yeah, it's something that we're looking for our students to develop, and as you say, we're not looking for them to be brilliant at that at level 1 when they come straight in. Yeah. So yeah, it does develop with practice.
No, it does, and in particular, I mean, at the level 1 modules, things are very carefully scaffolded, and we were saying to students before, don't worry, you're not expected to, you know, all of a sudden reference some and get everything right from day one. It is something that you develop over time, and level 1 is the time to make all the mistakes and do all of that, because it's not, you know, a huge part, well, it's not a part at all of your overall grade at the end of the day. Okay, now we asked you how much of a challenge you find writing in your own words, and let's have a look at the results, because they were pretty spread. So we had a continuum here in this instance, and we can see that for some people it's a fairly big challenge, but for a lot of people it's not a huge challenge at all, which is absolutely fantastic. We've also asked, which we'll take a look at in a little while, about the elements you most use from text and your confidence in presenting ideas in your own words. So again, do feed those and just click on the box that applies to you as well. Okay, so we've spoken a bit about an academic perspective and why we, you know, as academics, why it's an important skill and what we might do. But as a tutor, Claire, we ask students to write in their own words, and Peter was talking about the relationship that had with assessment and assessing understanding of something, and that in writing in your own words, it gave your tutor an idea that you understood something and that you were able to contextualise it in a specific instance, which may not include the whole entirety of what you're actually talking about. What do you look for as a tutor in terms of students having written in their own words well?
I think, well, in STEM, there's certainly a need to try to get to grips with some terminology. And obviously there are some terms that can't be changed, otherwise you'll alter the meaning. And students will often say this to me, well, I can't change that because there's only one or two ways to say that. So that's fair enough. So we're looking for a certain level of terminology, but it's also their understanding and their explanation. So as a tutor, I need to see that my students understand those terms and that they can use them in the right context, really.
Because I think it is difficult when things are definitions, you know, and you can't use them differently. We've got some examples we'll talk about a little bit later in terms of how sometimes an incorrect word or tense even can completely change the meaning of something and convey misunderstanding of the whole concept entirely. Okay, we asked students about elements that they used from texts, and a lot of them are using quotations, definitions and terms, so again linking back to what you're saying, and empirical evidence and theories. So students are picking up a range of sources, and I guess all of these sources are things that we would be looking at. But some are more difficult to write in their own words. So let's take a look at then this idea of theories and sort of presenting, I guess, more abstract concepts. So moving away from the definitions or more, you know, nitty-gritty points of a particular discipline, perhaps. Theories and things. How might students sort of convey something quite complex? Well,
I think it comes down to the very basics and starting to try to convey things at the stage that you're note-taking and you're preparing your assignments. So trying to get the basic points of those theories so that you understand the crux of them is where you would start, really. Often what we do see as academic conduct officers is students relying perhaps a little too much on the structure and the way it's been explained in the module guidance, in the module books or the online module material. And so what we would say is, you know, read something. Obviously, if you're preparing your assignment, you might need to go back and look it up. Nobody remembers everything. So go and read it, but then put it away. You know, look away from your computer screen, close your book, and then just try and jot down the main points of it. But if it's something that you feel you really absolutely cannot say another way, you cannot say better yourself, then I think you need to indicate that fairly for academic credibility, for good academic practice, and just put it in quotation marks so that you're clearly distinguishing, okay, I've explained this bit myself in my own words and my own understanding, but not this bit. This bit is relayed exactly as it was in this source.
So what happens then when students might sort of change the odd sentence or two if they think, I can sort of say it, but again, I need the structure there because of the ordering or something. Very often, when I've noticed it, it's not in something that is fundamental to the structure. It's often a lack of clarity or lack of understanding or confidence, perhaps even, and an ability to communicate that. It's not necessarily a causal or linear relationship that has to be done in that sort of trajectory. So what advice would you give to students who do feel that need to paraphrase? You've said put things down, try and write them bit by bit, and I guess then check back that understanding. But in terms of conceptually thinking about things, might it be useful to think about things in a different context or a different way, flipping things maybe, thinking about things in relationship to other things? Can that help shift some of that need to stick so closely with the text?
I think it can do. I mean, often when we write assignments anyway, we're not looking for students to necessarily just repeat back something. So we might be looking for them to merge two things together, say how they fit, say how they're different. So it can help. It's active reading, really, isn't it? And active writing. So it's taking something and saying where it fits with something else, as you say, or just flipping it round. Another thing I think that can really help if it is something that you lack confidence with and you're struggling with is to try using a voice recorder, a voice recording software, and just, you know, that is more your own words. When we're on the spot and we're speaking out loud, that is more your own words than sometimes students will give you when they're writing. So it's a good way to start to get to grips with that style.
And there's, also we sort of say to students, if there's something you need to explain, something either voice recorder or just think about when you made your notes, if a student, your fellow student, or say, oh, what do you know about, or what is, say, you know, DNA? You wouldn't paraphrase exactly what's in the module material or something you'd read. You go, oh, it's this, this, and this. This is because I've read about it, and that's writing almost, well, speaking in your own words, and hence writing in your own words, that you're not just, you wouldn't remember word for word an exact definition or anything around that.
Yeah.
Think about chatting to another student and how you would describe something that was being asked of you.
It's really interesting because in our earlier session today we were asking our audience about how they felt, you know, when they felt most confident expressing new ideas and things, and a lot of them said that one of the most popular things was about thinking out loud, about verbalising and externalising things. So I guess this could be quite a safe way of checking your own understanding of what's there and what isn't.
Yeah, just chatting to someone or online or, like you say, to study group or something like that.
And I think it builds confidence in tutorials
it does,
as well.
Yeah.
I don't think you really understand something until you try to explain it to somebody else.
No.
So it's
And
really
finding
good thing
different
to
ways to explain it, obviously.
Yeah.
When I read some definitions in books about things, I think, oh, that's not a very good way of explaining it. How can I explain that somewhat differently?
And also in particular in science, when you're often focusing on quite discrete concepts or parts of a whole, sometimes you'll start talking about how it might relate to something or where it is, and actually then you still think, I don't know where this bit is. And you're talking about some minute part of something, and actually just being mindful that it might be helpful to think about the physical context of this,
Exactly,
or again
yes.
what it links to, or isn't that a similar thing to that? Those sorts of links again can be really helpful in terms of generating further understanding and things that will eventually scaffold onto each other down the line. Zach and, oh, we've got the wrong names here. Sorry, we haven't been quick enough changing our names. HJ. No, it's fine, Zach. We all know who you are. How's everyone on the chat? And are people feeling a little bit better about writing in their own words?
Yeah, there's a lot of really good discussion about presenting their viewpoints, and you know, we've been talking about backing it up with evidence, being objective, and you know, possibly even down to your own kind of experiences, and some great questions as well. I think Kester had one from Angela.
Angela wanted to know, in regards to sourcing, exactly what can we say ourselves as an opinion without an actual source, and also how much should it be my own and how much should be citations?
Well, very interesting question. In particular, for levels of students, because we know a lot of students here are level 1, and of course they're often the ones who are incredibly enthusiastic and often very knowledgeable. In particular in STEM subjects, they'll often have been doing something in a healthcare setting. They might know an awful lot. But we were talking as well about the sort of distinction between descriptive and evaluative, and how that increases depending on levels. So when might students have their own opinions that they acknowledge, and when might it be appropriate not to use those?
Oh, well, it's quite difficult really, but like you say, describing things from a source, or how far away do I go from that?
Yeah.
If it's common knowledge, even if it's scientific, then it's okay, and you wouldn't have to cite it particularly. You know, we won't expect anybody to cite the definition of pH or something like that in chemistry.
I think again, it's, as you say, it's to do with when you're fitting theories together and identifying the limitations. And I suppose we'd expect students to have more their own original thoughts and opinions as they get further up the level. So more in the project modules perhaps, rather than
where they're collating more information together that's perhaps written by other academics in research terms, because that's what they do when they get to level 3. They're looking at a lot of information, obviously they're continually cited, and then they can put that together and, well, this is interesting, I think this, and bring it together. But that is something that will come with practice at level 3 onwards, but at level 1...
less so. It probably depends on discipline as well, to be honest. So in STEM, one of the things that we don't like, one of the things that tends to be frowned upon is using I. as your voice in your piece of writing. So if a student tends to do that, we'll say, no, not in STEM, that's not what we tend to do. Whereas in other disciplines, they may encourage that more. So perhaps in some of the health and social care modules that I'm familiar with, they need to draw more on their experiences. So then it would be I, and this is what I thought of those experiences. So it does vary by discipline. So it's about knowing what you're writing for and why you're writing it.
Angela's really happy we've answered that question. That's what we're
I hope so. We try not to.
This is
in our own words.
Yes.
All in our own words.
It's a really important point, and I'd like to link it to one of the points that I know you wanted to talk about, which is the importance of reading your instructions, your assignment instructions. And one of the things I know we've been very mindful of is it's fine to think about your own opinion if you're asked to do that. However, if you're asked to describe something, it's not so cool, because you're asked to do something different. And at level 1, often you're asked to describe things, you're asked to sort of present things. You're being assessed on the stuff that is sent to you by the Open University and your understanding of that. You're not all of a sudden expected to have an original piece of work or interpretation based on something. So this whole idea about reading your instructions and understanding, I guess, what's expected of you might help frame the extent to which you do use your own opinion and the extent to which you don't. Because, of course, your tutor's got this marking criteria, don't they? And so you get the task, you get the areas to look at, you deliver the goods, and the tutor then marks it based on that criteria. So what might we say then about reading those instructions, I guess, and knowing what your brief is and how that might link to the extent to which you use your own opinion or write in your own words?
You just read very, very carefully. It's at level 1, as you say, we do tend to ask for more of the descriptive stuff. But those are the sort of building blocks in STEM. That's the foundational knowledge. But the critical point is we want your understanding of that foundation knowledge.
Not that you can find it in the book.
No. We could probably all find it in the book. But we want to know, have you understood it? Can you explain it? And quite often we'll be quite careful with our instructions in the assessment, and we'll say explain it to a layperson. So the language and the level at which we might want you to explain it back could vary. So it all comes down to reading those instructions really, really carefully and asking if you're not sure.
If you're not sure, and often we do put in, in your own words to highlight that, rather than just taking chunks from the text, and sort of changing it around, but it's still effectively chunked from various different sources, rather than you making your notes, little bullet points, going away and writing the answer to a more descriptive piece of work or an essay, for example, in the sort of biological and social sciences.
Good. Well, Leanne is poorly at the moment and needs a Lemsip and to go to bed, and is wondering whether this is available on catch-up. Indeed it is, Leanne, and you must go and look after yourself, because if you get very poorly, you're not going to be able to keep going with your studies. So the live stream will be available immediately after today closes, and our YouTube channel has hours and hours and hours of material on it. You can search for various things. There's all sorts of things there, like the virtual learning environment, how to submit your TMAs, how to be an online learner, lots of interesting discussions with members of the university. So for those of you like Pauline, who may be a bit overwhelmed with some of the information, please don't worry. There is plenty of help and support out there for you. So either watch the catch-up or look at the YouTube channel, and most importantly, if you can join us next week and anew, we have our refreshers orientation, where we will be running through a lot of these things for you. But of course, ask us questions in the chat as we're going along, except Leanne, who needs to go to bed. Thank you for coming, Leanne. You take care and wrap up warm. Okay, so important points here then about the idea of reading the instructions, being mindful of what you're being asked to do, quoting those relevant sources, etc. And of course, tutors are going to feed back on these things. And at the end of the day, if you can just show that you know where it is in the book as opposed to what you know, you're going to get very limited feedback, which isn't really going to help develop. So what would you say to students about having a go at something, and how tutors actually work with this process of feeding back on these tutor-marked assignments? And that it's not really the end of the world, I guess, if you get something really wrong, that they're going to sort of help you develop things as you're going along.
Yeah, I mean, we spend an awful lot of time giving feedback for our students, and believe us, we do care about it. And I'd much rather my students have an attempt at explaining something so that I can understand where they've got the misconceptions, if they have any, or if I can help them structure their writing more in the style that we look for, because I know what they're going to need to do at the next level and the next level of their studies, and what's going to be valuable to them as they move forward in their careers. So, you know, I suppose this is where I feel it has the value, is if they are writing in their own words rather than just taking something from somewhere else. Is when you do that, the feedback that your tutor's giving you is just rendered useless, really. So we do our best to help.
I think also the students themselves, they need to just have confidence and do it. We've all been there.
Oh, yes.
We've all had to write these essays and they come back and say, well, no, that didn't really hit the mark, etc. But how are you going to learn otherwise? You have to, like anything, you learn from your mistakes, don't you? And, you know, it's just developing part of good academic practice, and just develop it throughout your studies.
And like you say, sometimes you're not aware that you've got a misunderstanding. I mean, you've got some examples here, Ellen, which I'll read out a couple because they're actually brilliant. And these are the sorts of things I think that, you know, often happen, you know, whilst they're here to sort of be teaching points. It's entirely plausible that a student would do this, and there's nothing to be ashamed of or embarrassed about. But like you say, Claire, if you don't have a go at writing it in your own words, you can't make sure that you understand what you're saying. So here we've got a couple of sentences. I'll read them out. Humans exist, this is the correct sentence in the book. Humans consist of many millions of cells. A single human cell is a complex entity that to some extent is self-sufficient. Many processes go on within it independently of what's going on in other cells. And then this is a paraphrased one, which is where some of the... Yes, this is your example.
Thesaurus
which again might be... So it says, beings consist of many millions of compartments. A solitary human cell is a multifaceted creature that to some degree is independent. Many activities go on within it independently of what's happening in other cells. Now that sounds fairly similar.
Yeah.
But actually there are some massive fundamental misconceptions here about things. And again, it's this whole point of choosing words carefully. And we don't want to scare students by any stretch of the imagination. But I guess it shows how if you write something like the difference between humans consist of many millions and millions of cells, and beings, which is something entirely different, consist of millions and millions of compartments, they're entirely different aspects and demonstrate something completely different.
It's lost its meaning.
Yeah.
It's muddled and a little nonsensical at that point. And of course, because that is science, we expect you to be very concise and meaningful, obviously. And then I'd read that and go, oh, I don't really know what that means. But that's not writing in that's just taking a thesaurus and every other word, you know, changing it.
So this might be an example of a student who may lack confidence and think that all sounds really good.
And that's
I appreciate
writing,
I want to write in my own words, so I'm going to change a few things. But actually what they've done is changed the meaning entirely.
Yes.
And then this might be picked up by a tutor. Now, might that be then marked down? Might they fail this?
Well, I think your tutor would notice that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So, and you know, that's probably not the objective of even the question.
I think the tutor would notice that it has been a case of, okay, I know I can't represent it exactly as it is, so I'll just change that word and I'll change that word. And the tutor would attempt to give some useful feedback going forward.
But in science, I mean, this would be a point or so of a module, you know, it would be a short answer question, so all is not lost. It's best to have a go at these things, because again, if you don't understand the difference between a cell and a compartment, ultimately, down the line, there's going to be a problem.
Yes. Yeah, and exactly. I mean, and of course, like you say, it's very technical terminology that we do in science, and so when reading that, you read it back to yourself. I mean, that sounds...
Actually, that's a really good thing,
you know,
because
a bit ridiculous.
it's often very evident when you read things out loud. You can see when students have tried to paraphrase things, and you can often see that they sort of get the gist of it. They are really trying, which is good. It's better to try than not. It really, really, really is. And it's certainly better to try writing in your own words than having a massive quote, because again, that just shows you that you know where it is, not what it is. But again, you know, it's one of those things that if you do read it out loud and often think, hang on, does that make sense? Do I really mean that? And you can sort of take a break, put the books down and step away from it. it, read it out loud, read it to your cat or your friend or whatever, or try and explain it and think, is this a representation? That can all sort of help shift your writing in your own words, can't it? Okay, brilliant. We're nearly out of time. We've mentioned some of the things that we wanted to talk about, but there was this link between note-taking that I just wanted to pick up on, which you mentioned very briefly, about how it's important to start taking the notes in your own words. We've been looking before at ways of cutting and pasting quotes, about tracking back notes, about referencing those as and where they happen, so that even if you're collating aspects of direct copies of module material, you're clear on what is a quotation, what isn't, who said it, etc. But for some students, they will want to copy things out, in particular maybe out with glossary definitions or concepts or ideas. They might want to do those word for word. How might you encourage students to start writing in their own words with notes from the bottom up, and how might that influence then what they deliver in assignments?
Well, I'd prefer that they took that approach right from the start, but mainly because one of the things I've seen is students who've taken that approach and then run out of time, and then they've submitted what is effectively a lot of copy and paste, and they've said, you know, I was just collating my notes and I ran out of time, but unfortunately then they've gone ahead and submitted that work, and without appropriate acknowledgement, it's not a good thing to do, it's not good academic practice. So we will always advocate right from the start, please, as far as you can, try and write in your own words. And again, it goes back to this whole active reading and active note-taking. It's not just reading something and going, okay, that was what that bit said. It's how does that bit fit with what I read 3 pages ago or last week, or how is it going to help me to answer the question I've been set? So it's taking notes in a very different way. It's for a purpose and fitting it as a part in a larger whole, as it were.
But say you're being a bit sloppy and it's late at night and you write something incorrect and all of a sudden you're down this line of thinking that cells are compartments or whatever. When do you go back? Like, how can you sort of sense check? Because some students might be worried and think, actually, I don't want to, you know, I'm really worried that I might misrepresent something in my own words, and then, you know, it might not make sense to me. How do you sort of check between the two as you're going along?
I think you can always ask your tutor whether you've made sense of something. I think that's a good way to go. But again, just reading it back to yourself. The difficulty comes with reading it to another student on the module, because then you're walking a fine line between collusion. So you've got to be a little bit careful with that. But you know, if you've got another half in the household or a friend or a granny or whatever, sometimes just saying, have I explained this? Do you understand what I've written there? That could
Although those are the most annoying people, because then they'll go, yeah, but what about that? And you're like, I don't know that, but I only know this. But yeah, I'm not talking about that. But again, it can actually, to be fair, help with links, I guess.
It can.
And at the end of the day, you know, I've sometimes gone off a wrong track, and then all of a sudden I'm down the line and I think, actually, this doesn't make much sense. And you can retrace things and think, I didn't understand that. And you don't always understand everything at the beginning. Sometimes you'll develop ideas and you'll get more of a concrete, you know, representation of what that concept is. Often we will build on things. We'll introduce students to at level 1. And then in a few years down the line, they'll say, I remember this. And actually, you know, they've had a tiny bit of detail here, and then all of a sudden a lot more. So it's not the end of the world.
No. I'd rather see something, you know, a student, and sometimes we do at level 1, ask them to write their own definition of something. Like I said, think about what it is and talk to another student, rather than just going to a glossary and copying and pasting it. Because would you remember that? And would you remember actually sitting down and thinking, okay, if I was to explain this to someone and describe it to someone, I wouldn't use a glossary. You know, I wouldn't repeat those 3 sentences exactly. So,
excellent. Well, Ellen and Claire, thank you so much. It's been a really useful session, and a lot of chat has been going on as well. Thank you, Zach and Kester. Any last comments from the audience at home?
No, a lot of people in general just found this session really helpful, really important, and a lot of discussion about being objective, backing up your own opinions, and I think a lot of people have been finding it really useful. And we are I think we're having a bit of a chat about kind of disability support as well at the moment, and putting that into place. So really good chat, really good advice and stuff on there. So yeah, it's looking good.
Excellent. And we've got some sessions next week at our Refreshers orientation event, one in particular from the Disabled Students Group. So if this is an area of interest to you, do make sure you check out the programme that will be on the website imminently, and make sure that you come to our sessions, which are on the 31st of January and the 1st of February. We're now going to show you a short video on referencing, and then we're going to come back and talk about referencing and also common knowledge. So join me in a few minutes for our next session.